My name is Kathleen Moore. I am 72 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I worked as a seamstress. My hands have been marked by years of needles and thread, and my back bends a little from nights spent hunched over fabric. I thought those scars were the proof of love, the quiet legacy of a mother who gave everything for her son. I never imagined that one day those same hands would hang limp at my side, powerless, as I watched my own child take apart the only home I had left. It was a Tuesday morning, bright and ordinary. The sound came first, deep and heavy, like thunder rolling down the street. A truck, white, loud, familiar, in the way strangers' machines can sometimes be, stopped right outside my gate. I wiped my palms on my apron and stepped onto the porch, thinking perhaps it was a delivery for the neighbors. But then I saw him. Daniel, my son, my only child. He stepped out of the passenger side with his wife, Alyssa, close behind him. Alyssa's heels clicked against the driveway like a metronome of disdain. She shaded her eyes with large sunglasses even though the sun was not harsh. Before I could ask anything, Alyssa's lips curled into a smile that felt rehearsed. She pointed toward my front door, toward the living room I had filled piece by piece through decades of sacrifice, and said in a voice that cut sharper than any blade, "This is for our new house. You don't need this anymore." Her words hung in the air, cruel and matter-of-fact, and suddenly the men from the truck moved forward. They carried straps, gloves, and tools, and without hesitation they walked past me into the home I had built with my late husband. I stood frozen, like a figure carved out of stone. Within minutes, I saw my television, the one Daniel and I used to sit in front of every Sunday night watching old westerns and sharing bowls of popcorn, being disconnected and hauled away. The refrigerator, where I once stored Daniel's favorite lemonade, was rolled out, its door swinging open like a final goodbye. And then, the paintings. 3 of them. Landscapes my husband and I had chosen when we still believed we had a lifetime together. I had dusted them faithfully every week for more than 40 years. Now they were lifted off the wall and carried out like simple cargo. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask Daniel why, to plead, to remind him that these were not just objects. But when my lips parted, no words came. Instead, silence fell heavy. It was not the silence of weakness. It was the silence of a woman who knew that if she cried out, no one in that moment would hear her. Daniel avoided my eyes. He fiddled with the cords behind the television, his shoulders tense, his head bowed as if ashamed. But he said nothing to stop Alyssa, who stood in the doorway, arms crossed, directing the workers as though my home were already hers. "This sofa can stay," she murmured, waving a manicured hand. "It's too worn." "But the paintings, those are perfect. And the fridge, Daniel, make sure they secure it properly. We'll need it in the new place." I wanted to ask her, did she know how many nights I stayed awake, hand-stitching dresses to pay for Daniel's tuition? Did she know I had pawned the ring his father gave me on our wedding day, just so Daniel could have his first semester's books? Did she know the cost of every object she now claimed was mine to give up? But she did not look at me. She looked through me. The house grew emptier by the minute. The sound of dragging furniture, the clatter of tools against the floor, the grunt of men carrying weight. It was the soundtrack of my undoing. And still I stood still, one hand pressed against the doorframe, the other clutching the embroidered handkerchief with the letter K stitched into the corner. My late husband had given it to me on our first Christmas together. It was the last small thing I still carried, the anchor to a time when love filled these walls. "This is for our new house. You don't need this anymore." Alyssa's voice repeated itself in my mind like a curse. When at last the workers loaded the final piece, Daniel walked out behind them. He offered me a quick hug, mechanical, like the polite gesture of a stranger. His arms barely touched me. "Thanks, Mom," he said softly, but his eyes never met mine. "This means a lot to us." I did not answer. I could not. They climbed into the truck, Alyssa sliding into her silver sedan right behind. The engines roared to life. I braced myself for the sound of them leaving, for the hollow silence that would follow. But then, something unexpected happened. Just as the truck rolled past the gate, the brakes screeched. Tires pressed hard into the gravel, and the entire vehicle jolted to a stop. From where I stood, I saw Daniel's shoulders stiffen in the driver's side mirror. Alyssa snapped her head toward him, her mouth moving in sharp words I could not hear. The workers in the back looked confused, gripping the straps that held down my belongings. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Why did they stop? What thought ran through Daniel's mind in that instant? Did he remember the nights I sewed until dawn, just so he could go on school trips like the other children? Did he picture his father's face, proud and young, hanging those paintings on the wall? The truck idled there, engine humming, a heartbeat suspended. I stood on the porch, not moving, my breath caught in my chest. I did not call out. I did not ask. Because sometimes silence is the sharpest mirror. Sometimes the weight of conscience can press heavier than any shout. And in that strange pause, as the truck lingered at the edge of my life, I realized that this was the moment my story truly began. When the truck stopped at the gate, I stood there motionless, the cool air brushing against my skin. My eyes wandered back to the empty corners inside my home, to the places where furniture once stood, where memories used to live. The walls had pale rectangles where paintings had hung for decades. My fingertips traced one of those faded outlines, rough to the touch, and in that moment my mind slipped away to another time, to the night everything began. Daniel was 15 years old when his father died. It was raining so hard the streets overflowed with water, and I came home from the hospital drenched, carrying the news that would change both our lives. Thomas, my husband, was gone. A construction accident, sudden and merciless. I still remember Daniel sitting on the small wooden chair near the window, his teenage frame shaking as he realized what the word widow meant for me, what fatherless meant for him. I gathered him into my arms that night, rain still dripping from my hair, and through the blur of tears I whispered, "You will never go without, my son. You will not lack anything." My voice cracked, but I forced the promise out like a vow, and from that moment it became the law of my life. Days blurred into nights, and nights into long hours bent over fabric. I turned the small room at the back of our house into a workshop. The hum of the old sewing machine became my only companion. My fingers were pricked and scarred by needles, my nails broken and raw. There were nights when the lamp on my table flickered and dimmed, casting a yellow glow that made the room look more like a cave than a home. The silence was filled only with the mechanical rhythm of stitches. Each piece of fabric had a purpose. Dresses for teenage girls turning 16, uniforms for school children, curtains for neighbors. Every dollar earned went straight into Daniel's school fees, his food, his notebooks, his dreams. I stitched the future with each seam. My body broke little by little, but I told myself this was what love looked like. When Daniel was accepted into the engineering program at the university, I didn't hesitate for a second. I went to the small wooden box where I had kept the treasures of my marriage, the diamond ring Thomas gave me on our wedding day, the gold earrings I inherited from my grandmother, and the simple wristwatch he gave me for our first anniversary. I wrapped them in a white handkerchief. Yes, the same handkerchief with the embroidered K in the corner, the one I still carry today. My hands shook as I held it, because I knew I was about to let go of the last pieces of a life that had once made me whole. At the pawn shop, the man behind the counter looked at the jewelry briefly, before saying, $1,200. His tone was blunt, indifferent. To him, it was metal and stone. To me, it was my past, my heritage, my memories, but I nodded. $1,200 was enough for Daniel's first semester tuition. I walked out, clutching the receipt, my eyes blurry, my throat tight, but also my heart oddly steady. That night, I placed the pawn ticket inside the handkerchief and tucked it into my sewing box, the K. In the fabric was like a quiet witness, watching me trade my history for my son's future. For 5 years, while Daniel studied, I worked 12 hours a day. My shoulders stooped, my joints stiffened. There were nights I couldn't unclench my fingers. When I pressed my palm flat, I saw tiny puncture scars, a constellation of sacrifice carved into my skin. Yet every time Daniel called to tell me about his classes, about the bridges he designed on paper, or the projects he built with his team, I felt my lungs fill with air again. "Mom, I'm learning so much," he would say with excitement. I smiled through the pain in my hands, through the nights when sleep refused to come. Sometimes I would wake from restless dozes and find myself standing silently by his door, watching him bent over his textbooks. He never knew how often I did that, how I found strength in simply watching him live the dream that had cost me so much. I remember his graduation day as clearly as if it happened this morning. I wore the only elegant dress left in my closet, wine-colored fabric I had saved for special occasions. Almost everything else had been sold or worn thin. My shoes pinched my feet, but I clapped until my palms stung when his name was called. Daniel walked across the stage in his black gown, tall and confident, his smile so bright it outshone every lamp in that auditorium. Afterward, as we stood together for a photograph, he leaned close and whispered, "Thanks, Mom. I never would have made it without you." I still have that photograph on my nightstand. It was the last time I believed that promises between mother and son could never be broken. I held that memory like a treasure, certain that the future ahead would finally be kind to me. But now, as I stand in this house stripped bare, my fingers resting on the empty space where the mountain landscape once hung, I wonder how memories can shift so sharply. I feel the coldness of the wall under my hand, the rough paint catching at my skin. Where once there was color and life, now there is only a pale rectangle, a ghostly outline of what used to be. I clutch the handkerchief again, the one with the K embroidered in the corner. Its fabric is thin now, nearly transparent in places, but the thread is strong, unbroken, like a lifeline. I press it to my lips, not for comfort, but to remind myself that I once made a promise, and I kept it. Even if no one else remembers, I do. The silence in my home now is heavier than the nights filled with the hum of sewing. Back then, I was tired, but I was purposeful. Now I am empty-handed, watching as my life's work rolls away in the back of a truck. And yet, inside me, there is still the echo of that rainy night, the whisper I gave my son, "You will not lack anything." Perhaps I never realized what such a vow would cost. Perhaps I never thought about what it meant for me, the woman behind the stitches, the one holding the needle. I gave and gave, until there was nothing left but the memory of who I used to be. And now, as the gate stands open and the gravel path lies bare, I know that every faded wall and every scar on my hand is not just proof of sacrifice. It is proof that promises once made become a burden a mother can never set down. I remember the Sunday afternoon when Daniel first brought Alyssa home. The air was heavy, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I had set the table with my best porcelain cups, the few pieces I had left after years of breakage and selling. I wanted everything to feel warm, welcoming. I believed I was about to meet the woman who would become part of our family. Daniel walked through the doorway, and behind him came Alyssa. Her presence filled the room instantly. She was tall, her blonde hair styled with precision, not a strand out of place. She wore a coral dress that seemed to shimmer against the dimness of my living room, and her nails, long, lacquered in a sharp red, tapped against her clutch with a rhythm of impatience. She looked around my modest home the way some people glance at a thrift store window, curious yet with an air of distaste. "Mom, this is Alyssa," Daniel said, his voice lighter than usual, but it carried a strange tension, almost as if he were apologizing in advance. I stepped forward, wiping my palms against my apron, and reached out my hand. "It's so nice to finally meet you." Her fingers brushed mine briefly, a graze more than a handshake. Almost immediately, she pulled out a small tissue from her purse and dabbed at her hand. "Nice to meet you, ma'am," she murmured without meeting my eyes. I swallowed the sting and smiled. "Please, sit down. I'll make some coffee." While I boiled water in the old coffee pot, I could hear them whispering in the living room. Alyssa's voice carried, clear and cutting. "Michael, did you really grow up here?" Her tone was incredulous, as if my walls were a revelation she could hardly believe. Daniel's reply was hushed, apologetic. "It's just temporary, love. You know we're saving for our house." My chest tightened, but I steadied my hands, poured the steaming coffee into the porcelain cups, and carried the tray to them with as much dignity as I could muster. "Here we are," I said softly, placing the cups before them. Alyssa leaned back, one leg crossed elegantly over the other, and gave the coffee a glance that could have soured the milk. "Thank you, but I don't drink coffee. Do you have organic green tea or imported mineral water?" I felt my face grow warm. "I only have tap water," I admitted. "Oh," she said, with a smile that never touched her eyes. "Don't worry, I'm not thirsty." The silence that followed was sharper than any insult. I tried to hold on to my role as hostess. "So, Alyssa, tell me a little about yourself." Her eyes traveled around the room instead. They landed on the sofa, worn from years of use. "This sofa," she said finally, her tone lilting with mock curiosity. "Is it antique?" My cheeks flushed, but I kept my voice calm. "It's just old. We've had it since Daniel was little." She gave a polite laugh, though it was more of a scoff. "And no air conditioning? That must be difficult in summer." Daniel shifted uneasily in his seat. He rubbed his palms against his knees, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't defend me. He didn't contradict her. The silence between us grew heavier. I tried once more. "Well, this house has been good to us. It has held many memories." "Of course," Alyssa said, flashing her red nails as she adjusted the pearl necklace at her throat. "But memories don't keep you cool in July." Her words cut deep, not because of what they said, but because of what they revealed. She wasn't merely noting the lack of air conditioning. She was noting the lack of worth she saw in my life, in my home, in me. Daniel finally spoke. "Mom works as a seamstress," he said, trying to fill the silence. "She's made clothes for the whole neighborhood." Alyssa turned her eyes toward my hands, scarred from decades of work. She tilted her head and smiled faintly. How quaint. It must be hard to get by on that these days. I straightened my shoulders. It's honest work, and it has always been enough. Her gaze lingered on me a second too long, as if she were studying an artifact. "Well," she said finally, turning back to Daniel, "at least you don't need her support anymore. You can take care of yourself." Daniel smiled weakly, a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom will always be important to me," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction, as though even he didn't believe the words. Alyssa reached for his hand, possessive, triumphant. "Of course, love, but it's time to build your own family now, don't you think?" I sat there, the porcelain cup cooling between my palms, the bitterness of coffee untouched on my tongue. The words in my throat remained unsaid. I wanted to remind Daniel of the nights I sewed until my hands bled, of the sacrifices wrapped inside every piece of furniture in that house. I wanted to tell Alyssa that the sofa she mocked had once been a fort for Daniel when he was 6, that the walls she dismissed had absorbed the laughter of a boy and the tears of a widow. But I didn't speak. I simply held the cup, let the silence speak for me, and watched as Daniel avoided my eyes. That was the first time I realized Alyssa wasn't simply Daniel's partner. She was a mirror reflecting everything he wanted to leave behind, and in that reflection, I saw my place shrinking. At first, I told myself it was normal. Sons grow busy, their lives expand, and their mothers wait patiently in the quieter corners. That is the rhythm of life, isn't it? So when Daniel began calling less often, I convinced myself it was because of his workload. When he started visiting only once every 2 weeks instead of every weekend, I told my heart to be understanding. He was young, ambitious, building a career, but then the visits became monthly, and even those carried an air of obligation. He would sit at the kitchen table, phone vibrating beside him, glancing at the screen more than at me. His words grew shorter. "I'm fine, Mom, just busy. Lots of projects." The calls ended faster. Sometimes I would hang up and sit staring at the receiver as if the silence could still carry his voice if I waited long enough. One evening stands out more than the rest. It was late spring, the kind of night when the air feels heavy but comforting. Daniel had come over for dinner, Alyssa in tow. I had cooked his favorite dish, chicken with rosemary and lemon, though I could tell Alyssa barely touched hers. Afterward, while I washed the dishes, I heard voices from the living room drifting toward the kitchen. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their tones were sharp enough to pull me closer. "Daniel," Alyssa said, her voice low but edged with steel, "you can't keep being a mama's boy forever." The plate slipped in my soapy hands, nearly shattering against the sink. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Daniel said nothing at first. I imagined his shoulders tense, the same way they had when she first mocked my home. Finally, his voice came, hesitant, almost pleading. "She's my mom, Alyssa. She's done everything for me." "And that's exactly the problem," Alyssa snapped. "She's done too much. She keeps reminding you of it. All those stories about sacrifices and sleepless nights, they're emotional chains. Do you want to spend the rest of your life tied to guilt? Or do you want to move forward with me?" I pressed my back against the cool wall of the kitchen, the damp dish towel still clutched in my hands. My heart beat so loudly I feared they would hear it. "Mama's boy." The phrase echoed in my ears, cruel and unforgiving. Had I done this? Had I tied Daniel down with love that had turned heavy? I thought back to the countless nights bent over the sewing machine, to the jewelry pawned in silence, to the whispers I told myself, "This is for him, always for him." I believed I was giving him wings, but what if instead I had given him chains? Daniel's voice came again, quieter this time, as though he were already surrendering. "She just wants me to be happy." "And I want that too," Alyssa countered quickly. "But happiness doesn't mean clinging to the past. You need to focus on us, on the life we're building. If you keep running back to her, how are we supposed to grow?" There was a pause, long enough for me to feel the weight of the answer before it even came. "You're right," Daniel whispered. The words pierced me deeper than any insult could have, though. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. I leaned against the counter, staring at the faded pattern of the hand towel, the K embroidered in its corner. My husband had given it to me once upon a time when promises felt unshakable. Now, clutching that little square of cloth, I wondered if my promises had cost me the very thing I swore to protect. My mind spiraled. Have I suffocated him? Every story I told Daniel about the sacrifices I made, was that love or was that unspoken debt? When I reminded him that I sold my wedding ring for his tuition, was it pride or manipulation? Had my love become a burden he could never set down? I thought of my own mother, how she raised me with quiet endurance. She had told me once, "A mother's love should feel like wind under your wings, not weights on your ankles." At the time, I nodded without fully understanding. Now I feared Alyssa's words might hold a cruel shard of truth. That night, when they left, Daniel hugged me briefly at the door. His arms no longer lingered around my shoulders. His smile felt rehearsed, as if he were checking a box on a list. "Thanks for dinner, Mom," he said, already glancing back at Alyssa waiting in the car. I closed the door after him and stood in the hallway, listening to the silence expand. The house felt cavernous, echoing with the ghosts of laughter that once filled it. I carried the dish towel with me to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands trembled as I smoothed the fabric. The embroidered K stared back at me, steady and unbroken. But I felt anything but steady. In the stillness of that night, I spoke aloud to no one. Maybe I tied him too tightly. Maybe love should have been lighter. The room answered only with the hum of the old refrigerator. The one Daniel and I had once stocked together with groceries when he was a teenager. Even that sound felt like a reminder that time was moving, that things were shifting beyond my grasp. For days afterward, those words gnawed at me. Mama's boy, emotional chains, guilt. They clung to me like shadows. I tried to shake them off, but they followed me into every quiet corner. When Daniel's calls grew even less frequent, when he canceled a visit with a casual, "We're busy this weekend," I didn't argue. I smiled into the phone, though my lips shook. "Of course, sweetie, I understand." But inside, my heart whispered the truth. I did not understand at all. It was a Tuesday morning when Alyssa came to my house alone. I was bent over the sewing machine, working on the delicate embroidery of a wedding gown for a neighbor's daughter. The tiny pearls slipped beneath my needle, each stitch demanding precision. I didn't hear her car at first. What pulled me out of my focus was the sharp knock at the door, followed by the staccato click of her heels on the wooden porch. When I opened the door, there she was, framed against the daylight. She wore fitted jeans, a cream blouse with a gold shimmer, and diamond studs that sparkled with every tilt of her head as she stepped into my home as though it were a showroom, scanning the furniture, the curtains, the very air. "Good morning, mother-in-law," she said with that polished smile, one I knew was for display only. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." I wiped my hands on my apron. "No, not at all. Please, sit." She perched on the edge of the sofa, careful not to sink into the worn cushions. Her posture was immaculate, her legs crossed elegantly, her hands folded in her lap. She looked less like a guest and more like a woman preparing for a business transaction. "It's about the future," she began, her voice syrupy but her eyes sharp. "Daniel and I have found the perfect house. 3 bedrooms, large garden in an exclusive neighborhood. It's listed for $200,000. I felt a flicker of relief. Perhaps she had come to share happy news, to include me in their planning. I smiled faintly. "That sounds wonderful. Have you set a date for the wedding yet? How can I help?" Her smile cooled. She leaned forward slightly. "That's exactly why I'm here. You see, for Daniel and me to make this dream a reality, we need to make some adjustments, financial adjustments." Her words dropped heavy between us. I nodded slowly, not understanding. "Adjustments?" She sighed softly, as though speaking to a child. "Daniel spends quite a bit on you. Visits, bills, little things here and there. A mother who truly loves her son would want him to focus on his future, wouldn't she?" The words sliced into me, though her tone remained sweet. I blinked, unsure if I had heard correctly. "I don't ask for anything," I whispered. Her eyes gleamed with something colder than contempt. "Oh, I know you don't ask. But you let him. The heater he bought you last winter, the medications when you were sick. Daniel tells me everything. That money could be going toward our house." I felt my hands tremble. My chest tightened. The air in the room grew thin, sharp as glass. She continued, her voice calm, deliberate. "A true mother wouldn't want to be a burden. She would step back, let her son live his life and not keep him tied to guilt. Don't you agree? Burden." The word thundered inside me, louder than any shout could have been. My breath caught. My fingers dug into the fabric of my apron, knuckles whitening. The sewing machine still hummed faintly behind me, a reminder of the work I had always done to stand on my own. Yet here, in my own living room, I was being named something I had spent my entire life fighting not to be. Burden. The room seemed to shift. The air turned cold. The light coming through the window dimmed as if the sun itself recoiled. My body betrayed me. My hands shook uncontrollably, my breaths came shallow. My heart pounded against my ribs as though it wanted out. I wanted to shout that I had sold my wedding ring to pay for Daniel's education, that I had sewn until my eyes blurred, until blood stained the fabric, that I had eaten stale bread so he could have meat on his plate. I wanted to remind her that I had whispered promises into the rain the night his father died, promises I had kept even when it broke me. But the words did not come. Instead, I sat in silence, letting her fill the air. She mistook my quiet for surrender. "You see, mother-in-law," Alyssa went on, her tone now openly condescending, "Daniel is a man. He has responsibilities. With me, with the family we're going to build. You had your time. You raised him. But now he belongs with me. He belongs to our future." Her words blurred at the edges. I barely heard them over the roar in my ears. My gaze fell to my lap, where the handkerchief with the embroidered K peeked out of my pocket. My fingertips brushed over the delicate stitches. It grounded me, tethered me to a truth Alyssa could never erase. I had built Daniel's foundation with every fiber of my being. Still, doubt crept in like a slow, poisonous tide. Had I loved him too loudly? Had I held him too tightly? Was my devotion a chain disguised as care? I swallowed hard, my throat raw. I never wanted to be a burden, I managed to whisper. Her smile widened, triumphant. Then prove it. Let him go. Stop calling so much. Stop accepting his money. Show him you truly love him by setting him free. Silence fell heavy. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my chest. My entire body was trembling now, though I sat perfectly still. The sound of her heels clicking against the floor as she rose cut through the air like a gavel striking judgment. She walked to the door, turning back once more. Her eyes glinted with victory. It's simple, really. If you want him happy, step aside. Otherwise, you're just another obstacle. The door closed behind her, and the house fell quiet. I sat for hours on that sofa, staring at nothing. The word lingered, etched into every corner of the room. Burden. It reverberated through me, dismantling the image I had carried of myself as mother, provider, protector. When the evening shadows lengthened, I finally moved. My hands, still trembling, reached for the sewing machine. The pearls on the gown blurred through my tears. My chest ached with a hollow, unnameable grief. For the first time in my life, I wondered if silence itself could kill. 2 weeks after Alyssa's visit, Daniel called me with a tone so rehearsed I knew the words weren't entirely his. He spoke slowly, carefully, as though reading from a script someone else had prepared. "Mom," he began, his voice wavering, "you have a lot of things in your house you don't really use anymore. Things that could really help us start our life together." I gripped the phone tighter, my pulse rising. "What kind of things?" I asked, though my heart already knew. He cleared his throat. "The television. It's too big for just one person. The refrigerator, you don't need such. A large one, and those paintings in the living room, they'd look perfect in the new house." The words landed like stones. The television where we had spent Sunday nights watching old movies. The refrigerator his father had proudly bought so that we'd never lack food. The paintings we had chosen together in the first years of our marriage. They weren't objects. They were fragments of a life, stitched with memory. I swallowed hard. "Those are all I have left of your father," I whispered. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle that didn't sound like Daniel at all. "It's not like we're stealing them from you, Mom. You can always come see them at our house." His words felt scripted, like lines Alyssa had fed him. "And if I don't want to give them to you?" I asked, my voice trembling. That's when it came. The word that sliced me in two. "Mom, don't be selfish." Selfish. The same lips that had once called me Mommy, with sticky fingers reaching for my hand, now formed that word as if I were nothing but an obstacle. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then, in the smallest voice, I said, "If you think this is what's best, then yes." "Thank you, Mom," he said quickly, relief flooding his tone. "I knew you'd understand." Understand? No, I didn't understand. I simply surrendered. The morning they came with the truck, the sound of its engine rattled my bones. I stood at the window, watching as 2 workers hopped down, straps and gloves in hand. Daniel climbed out of the passenger seat, his eyes avoiding the house until the last moment. Then came Alyssa, stepping gracefully from her shiny sedan, sunglasses still on, though the day was overcast. When I opened the door, Daniel hugged me quickly, perfunctory. "Hi, Mom. We brought some help to make it faster. We don't want to bother you too long." His words, intended as reassurance, cut like dismissal. Alyssa walked in as though she owned the place. "First, the television," she directed the workers. "Be careful, it's heavy. Then the refrigerator. After that, the paintings." She moved from room to room with ease, her manicured hand trailing over surfaces as if inspecting her new acquisitions. I stood frozen near the doorway, watching strangers dismantle my life. The television was unplugged, cables coiled like veins ripped from the wall. The refrigerator was tilted, its hum silenced as it left its corner bare and cold. The paintings, wrapped in blankets like bodies for burial, were carried out one by one. "Don't they look perfect?" Alyssa said to Daniel, pointing at the mountain landscape painting. "That will go in the dining room, and the other one in the hallway." Daniel nodded, his lips pressed tight. He never once looked at me. I found my voice at last, barely a whisper. "Be careful with those. Your father bought them on our honeymoon." Alyssa's smile was sharp. "Don't worry. Mother-in-law. They'll stay in the family." "But not my family. Their family." Her words made that clear. The workers moved efficiently, their boots thudding against my floor. Each sound was a hammer driving me further into silence. Daniel finally came to me, brushing dust from his hands. "Mom, thank you for helping us out. This means a lot to us." I stared at him, searching his face for the boy I once knew. The boy who clutched my skirt in thunderstorms, who promised me he'd take care of me when he grew up. All I saw was a man caught in someone else's shadow. "I'm glad you're happy," I said softly, my throat burning. "That's all that matters." He looked relieved, even grateful, as though my quiet surrender was the greatest gift he could receive. "You're the best mom in the world," he said quickly, hugging me again, lightly, briefly, as though contact itself embarrassed him. "I promise we'll come visit soon." But I knew the promise was hollow, words spoken to patch a wound he didn't intend to heal. Alyssa clapped her hands together once, satisfied. "That's everything," she said, adjusting her sunglasses. "Let's go." I followed them to the doorway. Daniel climbed into the truck. Alyssa slid into her car. For the briefest second, as the truck pulled away, Daniel glanced back. Our eyes met, and in his I thought I saw a flicker of something. Sadness, regret. But it vanished before I could be sure. The truck roared down the street, carrying away my television, my refrigerator, my paintings, my memories. I stood in the silence of my empty house, the echo of Daniel's voice still ringing. Selfish. The word clung to me like a brand. The silence that followed the truck was unlike anything I had ever known. It was not the peaceful silence of early mornings when the sun had just begun to stretch across the curtains. It was a hollow silence, thick and echoing, as if the house itself had been stripped of its breath. I walked back inside slowly, each step sounding too loud against the bare floor. My eyes drifted to the living room wall where the paintings had hung for decades. Now, faded rectangles of lighter paint marked their absence. The empty spaces seemed like open wounds, raw and unhealed, screaming of what had been taken. In the kitchen, the corner where the refrigerator once stood was shockingly bare. The floor tiles there were cleaner, whiter, as if they had been preserved under glass. I stood staring at that empty square, remembering how my husband had smiled when we first bought it. "So our family will never lack food," he had said. Now the corner was just a void, a cruel reminder of how quickly promises fade. I filled the kettle with water, my hands moving on instinct, and placed it on the stove. Without the hum of the refrigerator, the kitchen felt cavernous. Even the smallest sounds, the drip of the faucet, the shifting of the kettle's metal on the burner, rang, sharply bouncing around the empty walls. When the water boiled, I poured it into my cracked porcelain cup, the one with a tiny chip near the rim. A chip Daniel had made when he was 8, reaching too quickly for milk. I had kept that cup all these years, though I could have replaced it. It wasn't just a cup. It was a memory held in clay. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the steam rise into my face. The tea tasted bitterer than usual, though it was the same leaves I had always used. Perhaps it was the silence that flavored it, or the knowledge that the clinking of ice in the glass refrigerator tray would never sound again. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew unbearable. It had always been there, steady, loyal. But now, without the television's murmur, without the refrigerator's hum, without Daniel's voice filling the space, it seemed to shout with every second that passed. Tick, 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 as though mocking me. "You are alone, you are alone, you are alone." I sat in the armchair, tea in hand, and looked around. The space where the television once stood was now just a faint outline of dust. I remembered the nights Daniel and I spent watching old black and white films, his laughter ringing out when the slapstick clowns tumbled on screen. I had laughed too, not always because the film was funny, but because his laughter made life lighter. Now the chair across from mine was empty, and the silence pressed harder. The wind slipped through the cracks of the old window panes, whistling in low notes. It made the curtains sway gently, as though the house itself were sighing. I pulled the embroidered handkerchief from my pocket, the one with the letter K stitched in faded blue thread. My husband had given it to me, and I had carried it through all the years of widowhood, through every sleepless night at the sewing machine, through every moment Daniel's needs came before my own. I pressed it to my lips now, as though the fabric itself might give me strength. The memories came uninvited. Nights when Daniel sat at the kitchen table, textbooks spread wide, his head bent over equations I could barely understand. I had stayed awake at the sewing machine in the next room, my own head bent over dresses and uniforms, needle pricking through fabric, fingers aching. I remember glancing up every few minutes just to catch sight of him studying, the yellow lamp casting both our shadows against the walls. His future was built in those hours, stitch by stitch, page by page. Sometimes he would rub his eyes and sigh, and I would slide a plate of bread and butter beside him. "Eat, sweetheart," I would say softly, and he always did, murmuring, "Thanks, Mom," before turning back to his notes. The sound of his pen scratching and the hum of my sewing machine were a duet I thought would last forever. Now, as I looked at the bare wall where the television once stood, at the corner stripped of its refrigerator, at the ghost outlines of paintings removed, the duet was gone. Only the clock's merciless tick remained. The house felt colder than it should have. I pulled a shawl around my shoulders and sat still, listening to the wind, to the emptiness, to the creaks of old wood settling. Each creak seemed to whisper of absence, of things taken. I told myself not to cry. But when I touched the edge of the chipped cup against my lips, the tears came anyway. They slid down my cheeks and fell into the tea, salting it with grief. I wiped them quickly with the handkerchief, pressing the embroidered K so hard against my eyes that the threads left faint marks on my skin. That night, the loneliness sharpened. Lying in bed, the house seemed to echo with sounds I had never noticed before. The tapping of branches against the roof, the distant bark of a dog, the groan of the old floorboards, as if they too mourned the loss. Without the television's nightly chatter, without the refrigerator's steady hum, the silence became a weight pressing down on me. I turned in bed and stared at the nightstand. The graduation photo of Daniel still sat there. He in his cap and gown, me in my wine-colored dress. He-fanings. Both of us smiling with pride. I reached out and touched the glass, tracing the curve of his face. For a moment I could almost hear him saying, "Thanks, Mom. I never would have made it without you." The words rang hollow now, echoing against the emptiness of the house. I held the photo in one hand, the handkerchief in the other, and let the night wrap around me. The teacup sat abandoned on the table, a small crack glinting under the lamplight, fragile but unbroken, perhaps like me. I whispered into the darkness, not sure if I was speaking to my husband's memory, to Daniel, or to myself. If love can turn into chains, then maybe silence is the only key. The clock ticked on, relentless. The house remained empty, and I, wrapped in my shawl with the embroidered handkerchief pressed to my chest, understood that I had entered a new season of life, one colder, lonelier, but perhaps still holding the faintest seed of something not yet lost. The morning after the house felt truly empty for the first time, I sat at the kitchen table with my cracked porcelain cup in front of me, steam rising faintly from tea that had already gone cold. The corner where the refrigerator once stood still felt like a wound, and the silence pressed in like heavy fabric. I was staring blankly at the wall when a soft knock startled me. I hesitated before opening the door. Standing there was Linda, my neighbor of more than 30 years. She held a plate of cookies wrapped carefully in a cloth napkin. "Good morning, Kathleen," she said, her voice warm but lined with concern. "I thought you might like some company." For a moment I couldn't speak. The sight of her familiar face, framed by graying curls, nearly undid me. I managed a faint smile and opened the door wider. "Come in, Linda." "Thank boss. You." She stepped inside and glanced around, her eyes falling on the empty spaces almost immediately. Her expression tightened, though she said nothing. Instead, she placed the cookies on the table and pulled out a chair. "I baked these last night. I tried a new recipe. Thought you could use something sweet." I sat across from her, fingers wrapped around my cold cup. "You didn't have to," I murmured. "I know," she replied softly, "but I wanted to." For a while, we just sat there in silence. Linda reached for one of the cookies and broke it in half, the crumbs scattering across the table. She pushed the other half toward me. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly, and took a small bite. The taste was simple: sugar, butter, warmth. It reminded me of Sunday afternoons long ago when my husband was alive, and neighbors gathered on the porch with coffee and pie. Linda leaned forward. "Kathleen, I want you to know something. You are not alone. No matter how empty this house feels, you still have people who see you, who care." Her words pierced through the heaviness inside me. My lips trembled, and though I tried to keep the tears back, they came anyway, rolling down my cheeks quietly. I pressed the embroidered handkerchief to my face, the faded letter K against my skin. Linda reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "I may not know everything that's happened," she said gently, "but I've seen enough to know you don't deserve this. You've given more to that boy than most mothers could ever dream of. Don't you ever let anyone call you a burden." That word, burden, echoed again in my chest, sharp and cold. Hearing Linda say it out loud, but in defense of me, felt like a balm. I looked at her through tear-blurred eyes. "Do you really think I've not suffocated him somehow? That all my sacrifices weren't chains after all?" Linda shook her head firmly. "Kathleen, love is not chains. Sacrifice is not blackmail. You worked your fingers raw so he could have a future. That's not guilt, it's devotion. Don't let anyone twist that truth." Her conviction startled me. It was as if she had taken the confusion swirling inside me and held it still long enough for me to see it clearly. She glanced again at the bare wall where the television had once hung. "I remember the sound of laughter coming from this house," she said softly. "I remember Daniel's voice spilling out the windows when he was a boy. That doesn't just disappear because of a few unkind words. That history lives here, in these walls, in you, and no one has the right to erase that." I couldn't stop the tears then. I covered my mouth with my handkerchief and let myself cry in front of her. For months, I had held everything in, every doubt, every ache, every humiliation. But Linda's words, her steady presence, cracked something open. She squeezed my hand. "You are not what they say. You are, Kathleen. You are strength. You are grace. And whether Daniel realizes it now or not, you will always be the foundation he stands on." The kettle began to whistle softly on the stove. I rose to pour hot water into her cup, refilling my own as well. This time, when I sipped the tea, it didn't taste as bitter. Maybe it was the sugar lingering on my tongue, or maybe it was the comfort of another soul sharing the silence with me. Linda picked up one of the cookies and smiled. "You know, when my children grew up, they drifted too. Not like this," she added quickly, shaking her head, "but they have their own lives. Sometimes weeks pass without a call. It hurts, but I remind myself they still love me. They're just caught up in their world. Daniel, he will come to see the truth one day, and when he does, he will know his mother never wavered." Her words hung in the air like a soft blessing. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile, faint but real. "Thank you, Linda. I don't know what I'd do without neighbors like you." She grinned, her eyes sparkling. "Neighbors? Kathleen, after 30 years, we're family." That simple declaration struck me deeper than she knew. Family. The very thing I feared I had lost was being offered back, not through blood, but through kindness. When Linda left that afternoon, the house still felt empty, but not quite as hollow. The ticking clock still echoed, but now it beat alongside the memory of her words. "You are not alone." I sat again at the table, the embroidered handkerchief folded neatly beside my teacup, and whispered to myself, maybe I am not as invisible as I thought. For the first time since the truck left, I felt a flicker of something warm inside me. Not joy, not yet, but the possibility of it. The night was colder than I expected, the kind of cold that seeps through walls and bones, making every joint ache a little more. The heater had been broken for weeks, and without the refrigerator to keep leftovers, I had eaten nothing but dry bread and tea that evening. My chest felt tight, a soreness settling in that reminded me of the doctor's warning. At your age, Kathleen, you mustn't neglect your health. I wrapped my shawl tighter, but the chill was relentless. The medicine I needed sat waiting at the pharmacy, too costly for me to buy with what little I had left. For hours I debated with myself, pacing the living room where the television once stood. My eyes kept drifting to the phone on the side table, its shadow stretching long and dark under the yellow lamp. Finally, I sat down and dialed Daniel's number. My hands trembled so much I had to press each button twice to be sure. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. My heart pounded with each ring, clinging to the hope of hearing my son's voice. Instead, a woman's tone, sharp and clipped, answered. "Hello?" It was Alyssa. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Alyssa, it's Kathleen. Is Daniel there? I need to speak with him." There was a pause. Too long, calculated. Then her voice came, coated in impatience. "He's busy. What do you need?" I just wanted to ask if he could help me pick up some medicine tomorrow," I said softly, forcing each word past the knot in my chest. "And the heater isn't working. The nights are cold. If he had a little time—" "Mrs. Moore," she interrupted, her tone now laced with a smile I could hear but not see. "Daniel has a very long day tomorrow. He needs his rest. Don't trouble him with these things. You'll manage, won't you?" I tried to answer, but the words tangled in my throat. Before I could gather myself, the line went dead. She had hung up. I sat there, the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the hollow hum of silence. Slowly, I placed it back on the cradle. The weight of it felt heavier than any object should. The lamp beside me flickered slightly, its yellow light wavering against the bare wall. My shadow stretched long and thin across the floor, distorted, fragile. I stared at it, at the outline of a woman who suddenly seemed smaller than she had ever been. My hands found the embroidered handkerchief in my lap. I pressed it tightly, as though the faded letter K could tether me to strength. But my chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and my eyes refused to leave the phone, as if it might ring again, as if Daniel might call back and say, "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know." But the silence grew thicker. The clock ticked in the background, steady and merciless. The sound was louder than usual, echoing through the empty house. Tick, tick, tick. Each second passed without his voice, without comfort, without the sun I had built my life around. I leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. My tears didn't fall fast, not like the sobbing of youth. They came slow, heavy, sliding down into the lines carved by years of sacrifice. The kind of tears that left you empty after they dried. The cold pressed harder against me. I pulled the shawl tighter, but it was no match for the draft slipping through the window. My hands shook, not only from the chill, but from something deeper, a realization I had been trying not to name. I was no longer a priority in Daniel's life, perhaps not even a thought. The image of Alyssa's perfectly manicured nails flashed in my mind, her coral dress, her voice dripping disdain the first time she entered this house. Her words tonight echoed with finality. "Don't trouble him. You'll manage, won't you?" I wondered, was that all I had become? A woman expected to manage, no matter the loneliness, no matter the cold. I turned my gaze to the wall where one of the paintings used to hang. Its absence was a wound still fresh, the lighter paint screaming against the darker frame of the wall. In the flickering lamplight, the empty square seemed to mock me, whispering, "They even took your memories." I placed my cold hands flat against the table, fingers spread, trying to ground myself. The wood was rough, nicked with scars from decades of use. Meals shared, homework spread out, sewing patterns pinned. I could almost hear the echo of Daniel's young voice at this very table, asking me questions about school, about life, about dreams. how far away those days felt now. I picked up the phone again, almost without realizing it. The plastic was cold against my skin. I dialed the number once more, but stopped before the last digit. My finger hovered, my breath caught. I set it back down. There was no use. The line had been cut, not by technology, but by choice. The lamp flickered again, casting my shadow long across the bare wall. I stared at it, the outline of a hunched figure with trembling hands, a woman holding on to silence because silence was all that remained. I pressed the handkerchief to my lips and whispered quietly, "I'll manage." It was not defiance, not strength, not yet, only survival. The clock ticked on, relentless. The wind outside howled through the cracks of the windows, and in that small kitchen, under the wavering glow of a yellow lamp, I sat with the weight of the phone in my lap and the hollow ache of abandonment pressing against my heart. For the first time, I wondered if silence was not just the absence of noise, but the presence of truth. The days began to blend together in a blur of hunger and silence. Without a refrigerator, everything spoiled before I could finish it. Milk turned sour within hours, vegetables wilted in a single night. I stopped buying them. Instead, I kept a small bag of bread on the counter, eating a slice at a time with weak tea. The bread hardened quickly, but it lasted longer than anything else. Each dry bite scraped against my throat, but it was something, and something was better than nothing. My sewing, once my pride, began to betray me. My hands trembled constantly. The needles slipped, the threads tangled. Dresses that should have been beautiful came back to me in shame. One woman returned her order, shaking her head. "Kathleen, this hem is crooked. The buttons don't line up. This isn't like you." Her words stung more than she knew because she was right. It wasn't like me. I sat up late into the night trying to fix my mistakes under the dim light of the yellow lamp. My eyes burned. My back ached, and still the seams refused to straighten. The steady tick of the clock grew louder in those hours, as if it mocked me, counting down the moments of failure. I began to notice my clothes hanging loose on me. My skirt slipped down unless I pinned it at the waist. My hands, once strong from decades of work, looked bony and frail. My hair, uncombed most mornings, spread silver strands across my shoulders, tangled and tired. The mirror no longer reflected the woman I remembered. It showed someone older, someone defeated. One evening, as I sat at the table with another cup of tea and a crust of bread, the door creaked open. Linda stepped inside without waiting for me to answer her knock. She carried a casserole dish covered with foil, the smell of chicken and rice spilling into the room like a memory of better days. She placed it gently on the table. "Kathleen, she passa en this." Her voice soft but firm. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" I looked at the dish, my throat tightening at the sight of steam rising from it. The aroma made my stomach twist painfully, reminding me how empty I was. I tried to smile. "Oh, I've been managing." Linda narrowed her eyes. "Managing is not eating. Managing is not wasting away in your own kitchen." Her words hit me hard. My lips trembled, and before I could stop myself, I whispered the truth that had been gnawing at me for days. "It's been 3 days." The room went very still. My voice was so low I wasn't sure she had heard, but Linda froze, her eyes wide. "3 days since you've had a meal?" I pressed the embroidered handkerchief against my lips. I couldn't look at her. My silence was enough. She pulled out a chair and sat across from me, tears pooling in her eyes. "Kathleen, you can't keep doing this to yourself. You've given everything to others all your life. Isn't it time you let someone care for you?" Her words broke something open inside me. The tears I had been holding back slipped down my cheeks, slow and heavy. "I never thought it would come to this," I whispered. "All those nights I sewed until my fingers bled, all the sacrifices, and now I can't even feed myself." Linda reached across the table and clasped my hand. "You are not a burden," she said firmly, as if she could hammer the words into me. "You are not invisible, not to me, not to anyone who truly sees you. The steam from the casserole fogged my glasses, and I lifted them to wipe the lenses with my handkerchief. The letter K shone faintly in the lamplight. For years, it had been my quiet reminder of who I was. Tonight, it felt heavier than ever, as though it carried all the weight of my unspoken truths. Linda served me a portion onto a plate, the spoon scraping against porcelain. She placed it in front of me and handed me a fork. "Eat, Kathleen, please." I lifted the first bite to my mouth with shaking hands. The taste of chicken, warm and seasoned, filled my tongue. My body responded instantly, hunger rising like a storm. I chewed slowly, afraid the food would vanish if I ate too quickly. Tears blurred my vision as I swallowed. Linda smiled through her own tears. "That's better. That's the woman I know." As I ate, the silence of the house seemed to shift. The walls that had felt like a tomb just hours before now held the warmth of another person's presence. For the first time in weeks, I felt almost human again, almost visible. When I finished, I sat back, exhausted but calmer. Linda gathered the dishes, leaving the casserole on the table. "There's enough for tomorrow, too," she said, "and don't you dare say no. I'll be back to check on you." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat still ached with the weight of admitting the truth. It's been 3 days. After she left, I sat alone again, but the silence felt different. The ticking clock was no longer mocking. It was simply time, moving forward. The shadow cast by the lamp was still long, still fragile, but it no longer seemed so hopeless. I pressed the handkerchief against my lips once more and whispered, "Maybe I can still find a way." For the first time in a long while, the thought of tomorrow didn't feel unbearable. The morning it arrived, I wasn't expecting anything. Bills came sometimes, advertisements more often, but nothing personal. I had long stopped waiting for the sound of the mail slot to mean anything at all. Yet that day, when the envelope slid across the floor with a soft rustle, something in my chest stirred. The envelope was heavier than usual, the paper thick and cream-colored, not the kind that carried reminders of payments due. My name was written across the front in neat, deliberate cursive. The ink, a faded blue. It had been so long since I had seen handwriting that careful, almost reverent. I carried it to the table, my fingers trembling as I set it down. For a moment I only stared at it, afraid to open it, afraid it might vanish if I did. Finally, I slid my finger under the flap and pulled the letter free. The paper inside was filled with words written in that same blue ink. The lines wavered slightly, as though written by a hand older now, less steady. At the bottom, a name I had not spoken aloud in more than 50 years. Edward Harris. My breath caught. Edward. I sat down hard in the chair, the letter shaking in my hands. Memories surfaced like light breaking through deep water. Edward at 17, tall and serious, his dark hair falling into his eyes as he read aloud from books we borrowed at the library. Edward at 20, kissing my hand shyly after walking me home in the rain. Edward, the boy who had once promised me we would see the world together. And then, Edward left for medical school in another city while I stayed behind, bound to duty and family. Life had carried us on separate currents, and I had thought that part of my story was sealed forever. I forced myself to keep reading. "Dearest Kathleen," the letter began, "I hope this letter finds you, though I know the years have stretched long between us. I never stopped thinking of you. You were my first love, and perhaps the truest. I built a life elsewhere, as did you, but not a day passed that I didn't wonder what had become of you." Tears blurred the words, but I wiped them away and continued. "I must tell you the truth. 2 years ago, I lost my wife after a long illness. She was kind, and we shared many good years, but she knew, even in her last days, that a part of my heart had always belonged to someone else. She asked me to seek out happiness, and in doing so, she gave me permission to look for you." The lines of ink curved and dipped, a mix of sorrow and longing pressed into every stroke. "I have searched for you quietly with the help of a lawyer who traced the records back to this address. I don't know if you will welcome hearing from me. I only know that I could not leave this world without trying to see you again. If you are still the Kathleen I once knew, I would be honored to sit with you once more, to hear your voice, to know how life has treated you." At the bottom, the ink pooled slightly where the pen had lingered on his name, Edward Harris. I pressed the page to my chest, the paper crinkling under the pressure of my hands. My tears fell freely now, hot against my cheeks, dropping onto the letter. It was the first time in years I cried not out of hunger or humiliation, but out of the staggering realization that I had been remembered. Someone, somewhere, had kept me in his heart all these years. The room around me seemed to shift. The bare walls no longer felt like accusations, but like witnesses to something new. The ticking clock sounded different, less like mockery and more like a reminder that time, though cruel, sometimes returned what it had taken. I unfolded the last page, a note in a lawyer's hand. The office address was neatly typed, with instructions to call and arrange a meeting. Even the formality of it, the legal language, could not dull the trembling hope that rose inside me. I whispered aloud, my voice breaking in the silence. "After all these years." The embroidered handkerchief slipped from my lap to the floor. I picked it up and held it against the letter, the faded K brushing against Edward's inked signature. Two anchors of my life, colliding in a way I could never have predicted. For so long I had felt disposable, stripped of belongings, dignity, even of my role as a mother. Yet in that moment, with the blue ink trembling across the page, I felt seen, wanted, remembered. I read the letter again, slowly this time, tracing each word as though it were a lifeline. His handwriting was less steady, yes, but it carried the weight of truth. It carried the persistence of a love that had survived distance, marriage, loss, and time itself. When I finished, I sat in silence, holding the letter close. My tears had stopped, replaced by something quieter but no less powerful, a stirring of possibility. Edward was alive. Edward was looking for me, and after all this time, after all the silence and the losses, I realized something I had almost forgotten: how to believe. My story wasn't over. I chose the purple dress because it was the best I had. The seams were worn, the fabric a little faded, but it still carried the dignity of careful hands. I ironed it slowly that morning, letting the steam rise and curl around me, almost like a veil of protection. My reflection in the mirror startled me. The lines on my face were deeper now, the silver in my hair more pronounced. Yet beneath it all, I could still see traces of the girl who once walked home under the rain with Edward Harris at her side. When I stepped into the cafe, the scent of roasted coffee beans wrapped around me, warm and rich. It was a small place, tucked away from the busy streets, with wooden tables and lamps that glowed softly. My hands gripped the embroidered handkerchief in my purse, the letter K brushing against my palm as if reminding me who I was. Then I saw him. Edward rose from his chair by the window, tall still, though bent slightly with age. His hair had turned completely white, and his suit, though modest, was pressed neatly. When our eyes met, his face broke into a smile so tender, so familiar, that my breath caught. Still are Kathleen," he said quietly when I reached him. His voice was deeper, rougher, but it carried the same gentleness I remembered from decades ago. I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap to steady their trembling. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We only looked, as if trying to reconcile the memory of youth with the reality before us. Finally, he reached across the table, his hand hovering near mine before settling lightly over it. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," he admitted. "I almost didn't," I confessed. "It's been so long. We are not the same people anymore." His smile deepened. "Time changes the body, Kathleen, not the heart. My heart knew it was you the moment I saw you walk through that door." The waiter came and left, unnoticed. I could barely taste the tea he placed in front of me. My senses were fixed on Edward, his eyes lined with years, but still bright with recognition. We spoke of small things first, safe things, his years as a doctor, the travels he once dreamed of and later fulfilled, my life as a seamstress, raising Daniel, the weight of widowhood. I didn't tell him every detail, not yet, but I think he could read between the lines, the way my shoulders drooped, the way my voice sometimes faltered. There was a pause, the kind that stretches and deepens, pulling truth to the surface. Edward leaned forward, his voice low. "Kathleen, I don't want to waste another day. Life is too short for hesitation. Come live with me, not as a guest, as my partner, as the woman you should have always been." The words hung in the air, heavy with longing. For a moment, I wanted to say yes, to fall into the safety of his offer, to let him rescue me from the emptiness that had swallowed my days. My heart raced, aching for the comfort of belonging. But then, something steadied me. I thought of the night I whispered to Linda, "It's been 3 days." I thought of the hunger, the humiliation, the way silence had nearly consumed me. And then I thought of the moment I held Edward's letter in my hands. The first time in years I had felt seen. That letter had lit a spark, yes, but it had been my choice to open it, my choice to walk into this cafe. I drew a deep breath, my hand tightening around the handkerchief in my lap. "Edward," I said slowly, each word deliberate, "I can't say yes. Not yet." He blinked, his face flickering with surprise. "Why not?" "Because for too long I've lived for others, for my husband, for my son, even for neighbors who didn't see me. I forgot how to live for myself. If I walk straight into your home now, without learning to stand on my own again, I'll just repeat the same pattern." The cafe seemed to quiet, the hum of conversations fading into the background. I continued, my voice steadier now. "You found me when I had nothing left, when I thought I was invisible. And I am grateful beyond words, but I need to know that I can rise. Not because someone else carries me, but because I can carry myself again." Edward leaned back, studying me. Then, slowly, he smiled. It wasn't disappointment I saw in his eyes, but respect. "That's the Kathleen I remember. Stronger than you believe, gentler than you admit, but always steady. I will wait. Whether it's weeks or years, I will wait." A silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. It was full of understanding, like a pause in music where both listener and musician share the same breath. The waiter refilled our cups and Edward lifted his, holding it toward me. "To second chances," he said. I raised mine. "To stand again." We drank, and for the first time in a long while, the tea tasted sweet. When we parted, Edward walked me to the door. He didn't press me for promises. He simply took my hand in his, kissed the back of it gently, and whispered, "Whenever you are ready, I'll be here." I stepped out into the cool evening air, my purple dress brushing against my legs, the handkerchief warm in my palm. The street lamps glowed softly, casting long shadows on the pavement. For the first time in years, those shadows didn't feel like prison bars. They felt like paths, waiting to be walked. The phone rang late one evening, when the quiet of the house had already wrapped around me like a shawl. I nearly didn't answer. Most of my calls these days were wrong numbers or silent lines, but something in my chest told me to pick it up. "Mom?" The voice was broken, ragged. "Mom, it's me. It's Daniel." I froze. For months, silence had been the only answer between us, and now, here he was, crying like a boy who had skinned his knees. "Daniel," I whispered, my throat tightening. "What's happened?" He gasped, choking on words. "Everything. Mom, everything's gone. The company shut down overnight. They laid me off without warning. And Alyssa," his breath hitched again, sharp like glass. "She left. She left with my boss. They'd been together behind my back. She took—" "Everything, Mom. The savings, the furniture, even the paintings we took from you. She sold them and ran. I have nothing." The words spilled out like floodwaters, heavy and unstoppable. I sat very still, my hand pressed over my heart. My son, the man I had built my life around, was finally stripped of all the armor he had worn. No job title to protect him, no wife to flatter his pride, no stolen objects to fill his house. Only the raw, trembling truth remained. "Please," he whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't know where else to go. You're all I have left." When he arrived, I was waiting on the porch with the kettle already whistling. He looked smaller somehow, hunched under the weight of defeat. His suit was wrinkled, his shoes scuffed, his face pale with exhaustion. There were dark hollows under his eyes, the kind you don't get from one bad night, but from months of unraveling. I said nothing as he walked up the path. He faltered at the steps, as if unsure he still belonged here. I opened the door wider. Inside, I set the tea in front of him, steam rising from the chipped porcelain cup. The same cup he had once pushed away as a child, demanding milk instead. He wrapped his hands around it now, as if drawing warmth from the ceramic itself. For a long time we sat in silence. The clock ticked. The wind rattled against the window. He didn't look at me. He stared into the tea, as if it held the answer to questions he didn't know how to ask. Finally, he spoke. "I was wrong, Mom." I closed my eyes, the words I had waited years to hear, yet never truly expected. "I let her convince me that you were holding me back, that your love was some kind of chain. She made me believe that everything you did for me was a burden I had to carry. And I chose her. I left you alone. I took from you. God, I even called you selfish." His voice cracked on the last word, and he bowed his head, ashamed. I breathed slowly, the sound of his confession filling the empty house. My hands trembled, not with anger, but with the quiet ache of recognition. "Daniel," I said softly, "I love you. That has never changed." His eyes lifted, wet with disbelief, but I continued, steady now. "I am not your safety net anymore. I cannot be the one who saves you each time you fall. I carried you when you were a boy. I worked until my hands bled so you could have your education. I gave until there was nothing left of me. But now—" I paused, feeling the weight of the words before I released them. "Now I must live for myself." The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. He looked at me as if I had struck him. "You don't mean that," he whispered. "Mom, I have nowhere else." "I do mean it," I said. My voice was calm, not cruel. "I will help you find work, find a place to stay. I won't abandon you, but I will not let you drain me again. A mother's love is not meant to be a permanent rescue. Rope, it's meant to teach you how to swim." He covered his face with his hands, and his shoulders shook. For a moment, I wanted to reach across, to cradle his head the way I did when he was little, but I stayed where I was, letting the silence do its work. When he finally looked up, I saw something shift in his eyes. Not gratitude, not yet, but the first flicker of understanding. "You're stronger than I thought," he said quietly. "No," I corrected. "I've always been strong. You just never had to see it before." The words echoed inside me, resonating with the truth I had long hidden. He nodded slowly, wiping at his face with the back of his sleeve. "I'll try, Mom. I don't know how yet, but I'll try. That's all I ask." We sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't empty. The tea had cooled, but neither of us minded. He wasn't my boy anymore. He wasn't the man Alyssa had molded either. He was something in between, broken but perhaps ready to rebuild. When he left that night, I stood in the doorway and watched him walk down the path. He turned once, meeting my eyes, and I gave him the smallest nod, a signal of both love and boundary. Inside, I placed the cups in the sink, rinsing them carefully. My reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman older now, lined and tired, but upright, unbowed. And as I dried the cup with my embroidered handkerchief, I whispered the line that had become both wound and wisdom. "You've already lived your life. Now it's my turn." This time, it didn't sting. This time, it felt like the truth. I never thought I would move again at 74. For so long, I believed the old house was both my anchor and my prison. Its empty walls carried the voices of my sacrifices. Its silence kept me trapped in the shadows of what used to be. But when the time came, I found myself packing the few belongings I had left and carrying them into a small apartment near the library. It was not grand, but it was mine. a one-bedroom with sunlight that streamed through lace curtains in the morning and the faint hum of the city alive outside the window. The rent was modest, the walls freshly painted a soft cream, and the air smelled of possibility rather than decay. For the first time in years, I stepped inside a space that felt like a beginning, not an ending. Linda helped me move. She arrived with her old station wagon, filled to the brim with boxes of yarn, fabric scraps, and baskets of cookies she insisted I take. Together, we laughed at our clumsiness, dropping a bag of pillows on the stairwell, and we cried when we placed the first photograph on the shelf. Linda pressed my hand and whispered, "See? You're not alone. You never were." That night, I sat on the narrow balcony with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the street lamps glow over the sidewalk. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. The air was crisp, and my hands, though wrinkled and scarred, rested steady over the embroidered handkerchief on my lap. The letter K shone faintly under the lamplight, no longer a symbol of loss, but of continuity. A week later, Linda and I started something small but meaningful. At first, it was just the two of us in my apartment knitting scarves to pass the time. But word spread, as it often does among women who have lived through storms. Soon, 3 more joined us, widows, grandmothers, women whose children had left them behind. Each carried their own stories of silence and sacrifice, of being told they were no longer needed. We called it the warm thread. Every Tuesday afternoon, we gathered with yarn in our laps, the sound of needles clicking like a gentle heartbeat in the room. We made blankets for shelters, scarves for schoolchildren, hats for women at the cancer ward. But more than anything, we stitched our lives back together in the company of one another. In that circle, there was laughter, there were tears, and there was healing. We spoke about the husbands we lost, the children who forgot us, the nights we spent talking to shadows. No one judged, no one dismissed. Every voice mattered. One day, after the group had left and the apartment was quiet again, I sat at my little desk with a notebook open before me. I began to write my story. The words poured out like water, as if they had been waiting years for me to give them shape. And now, as I sit here, speaking into the silence that once haunted me, I imagine someone on the other side listening. Perhaps a friend I've never met. Perhaps someone just like me. I want to tell you this. We are not disposable. We are not relics to be cast aside once our usefulness is questioned. We are the foundation, the stones that carried the weight of families, of generations. Our hands may tremble now, but they are the same hands that built homes, fed children, kept lives afloat through hardship. Yes, I was once left in a house stripped bare, told I no longer needed the things that gave me dignity. But here I am in a new place, surrounded by women who understand. Here I am, still alive, still standing, still worthy. When I look back at Daniel, I feel no hatred, only a quiet ache softened by time. He visits occasionally, and though the visits are short and sometimes awkward, they are steps. He's learning what it means to stand on his own, and finally, I am learning what it means to stand for myself. Edward calls, and sometimes we meet for coffee near the library. He still looks at me as though I am the girl he once knew. I tell him I am not that girl anymore, and he smiles, saying, "That's why I love you even more now." I don't know what the future holds for us, but for the first time, I am not afraid to wait and see. If you've listened to me this far, perhaps you understand why I needed to share this. Because my story is not only mine, it belongs to so many women who have felt invisible, forgotten, or cast aside. We are not old furniture to be carried away in the back of a truck. We are the beams and stones of homes, the unseen strength that holds everything together. So tonight, before I fold this notebook closed and put the kettle on again, I want to leave you with a question. Do you think I was wrong? Should I have forgiven more quickly or held on tighter or given even when nothing was left to give? Or do you see, as I finally do, that sometimes the greatest act of love is to draw the line, to say, "I love you, but I will not let you break me anymore." If you have ever walked through something like this, I invite you to share it. Because when we speak, we are no longer invisible. When we gather, we are no longer alone. And when we remember, together, that we are the foundation, we reclaim the dignity that was always ours.